Hello and welcome to Issue Space. We are a podcast and community for everyone who is working to save the world. I'm Kat Addo. I'm an inclusive social impact strategist and the creator of Issue Space, the curator of these conversations that are really meant to affirm and sort of speak into the light the lived experience of having a career that is meant to transform systems, shake up society, and otherwise change the world, and also do performance reviews and this whole ridiculous paradox that we're in. I'm so grateful that you're here. You can learn more about Issue Space at issuespacemedia.com. We are actually growing a community in addition to publishing a podcast. And so I do encourage you, if these conversations and the lived experience of social change work resonate with you, to sign up for our community. You could go to the website and click join, and that will be your portal into newsletters, into contextualizing little stories and blurbs around each of our podcast episodes, but also especially for input opportunities into the future of the space. What does this community need to thrive, to feel like their work matters, to feel like somebody hears and sees and validates their experience and wants to give them the juice to keep going, to keep doing what we got to do to realize positive change. So please do consider it, issuespacemedia.com. This episode of the Issue Space podcast is called When the Good Fight Fights Us, Burnout in the Social Impact Space. And I literally just got tired reading that title because this is such a topic. The topic of burnout, the experience of burnout, the threat of burnout is always looming. I think culturally, in our work culture, I live and work in the United States. Our guests today live and work in the United States. And it's been explored a million different ways, how our culture around work and productivity, does not always center the human experience, does not always center the need for rest, the need for balance, the need for infrastructural support to make it possible to do our life's work. And I really respect all workers. There is something hard and uniquely challenging about every job. But I also hold space for the fact that if you're working in social impact, it can feel like a pile-on. You have all of the standard sort of work stressors that folks experience today. You have the urgency culture with a high volume of work, many deadlines, often competing. You have the kind of hyper collaborative culture, particularly for office workers, folks in quote, professional sectors. As the world has gotten more connected through technology, the expectations of being available online, of collaborating with 20 different people each time you want to send an email, whether well-intentioned or not, requires more of you. There's more of a social and intellectual and mental burn with that kind of work. In addition, right now, it's also been well explored, but there's just a lot of career ambiguity. It's like every few years, technology and politics kind of change what our work lives look like. And especially if you're working on social issues where the salience of your cause and the infrastructure and funding for your cause is radically impacted by political discourse, and the channels through which you do your work is radically impacted by technology. It can feel like you're always kind of scrambling to keep up. What is my job? And today, let alone what is the future of my job, so all of these things create a kind of floating stress. And then when you add on to that, the experience of somebody who has dedicated their professional life to making social change, the intensity only grows. I mean, we have to face it. No matter how positive the vision of the world we're fighting for is, no matter how personally convicted and energized we feel around our social issues, our social causes, the context is distress. You are exposed to a lot of distress. You are exposed to a lot of very specific, very thorough, sometimes graphic incidents of oppression, of violence, of community devastation, of public health crises. The list goes on. And whether or not you are directly interfacing with people impacted by these forces, whether or not you are directly interfacing with content that captures these forces, all of us are exposed to a high volume of distressing content. Necessarily, we have to. But what does that do for us? In the social impact sector, you're often working as a person or alongside people who have either already had direct lived experience with the social cause that they're working on, or face a threat of having direct lived experience, are kind of in the line of fire of a social injustice. And so we have to think about, when are the instances where people are being kind of casually re-triggered, re-traumatized, that when you take the part of you that has been the most violated, and that needs the most space for healing, and you can't necessarily take all the time to do that healing because you have to get in there and you have to roll up your sleeves and you have to stop whatever happened to you or your community from happening to the next person. It really doesn't leave much room to restore oneself. And even if you're not coming with the lived experience of a traumatic event, there's something called trauma by proxy or secondary PTSD, secondary post-traumatic stress disorder. It is usually spoken about in the context of people with jobs like intervening on mental health or being a 911 dispatcher, but you have to think about all of the other folks who less visibly are engaging with threats to our humanity and violations against our humanity every single day. And then if that is not enough, because let's talk about it. We're here talking about it, so let's talk about it. There is such an enormous sense of responsibility with social impact work. I have been in the space just 8 years, and I've yet to meet somebody who was here kind of indifferently, unaffected by what they were working on. Each person, whether they started out as a child, day one in their career, thinking that they wanted to fight for social change, or they kind of found their way to this work through twists and turns. Now, today, when they're working, they feel the weight of what they're doing. They feel a sense of responsibility to the communities that they're representing, to their country. And so what tension does that create with the idea of setting up balance and boundaries for yourself? If you feel like, even if you are in touch with yourself enough to know that, I'm getting close to my limit, but you feel that taking the space that you might need means that somebody else's life or death situation is that much worse. Somebody might spend the rest of their life in prison. Somebody might not get the medical attention that they need. Even in the more abstract, another piece of misinformation or disinformation or hate speech might go out that radicalizes somebody else. It's incredibly difficult for many people to step back from the work that they're doing, even when they need to, when you feel the weight of the world on you. So this is a topic that I'm passionate about because I really, really want the folks working in social change to win. I want it to feel as sustainable and rewarding as possible to have a career that not only feeds yourself and your family, but that feeds the communities and society around you. I think it is the key to the future. So I'm so excited to introduce our guest today to talk with me about the experience of burnout and about the threats that it poses to our work. Please join me in welcoming Brittany K. Barnett. Brittany is an incredibly accomplished and esteemed attorney and criminal justice reform advocate. I'm like tripping over justice because I'm like, criminal legal. Like the jargon, but trying to end over incarceration, trying to end bias in incarceration, trying to keep the criminal legal system in the United States from just swallowing communities whole. And Brittany, I have had the pleasure of meeting her and speaking with her before, and she's just the most humble, down-to-earth, inspiring person. So I cannot wait for you to hear her voice. Brittany is the founder of Manifest Freedom, which is an organization that supports entrepreneurs who have been impacted by the criminal legal system. She's the co-founder of the Buried Alive Project, which provides pro bono legal services to folks who have been targeted by life sentencing, overly harsh drug sentencing. She's the founder of Girls Embracing Mothers, or GEM, which is an organization that supports mothers and daughters who have been impacted by over-incarceration, both in solidifying their bond and in breaking the cycle of incarceration in their families. And she is the author of the memoir, A Knock at Midnight, that shares very vulnerably and very just honestly and accessibly her family's experience with the quote war on drugs here in the United States, how it played out abstract or at scale in her community and also very intimately in her own family and life. And I will never stop plugging this book. It is so good. I encourage you to read it. And of course, it's not just entertainment purposes. It is Brittany's real life. But I just encourage you, if you have a heart for this, to give it a read. But let me stop because I want to say hi to Brittany. Hi, Brittany.
Hi.
Thank you so much for coming into the space.
Absolutely.
I gave a little bit of like the greatest hits, baby. Like some of the highlights from your professional life. But I also want to invite you, if there's anything that you can share with us about Brittany the person, maybe something about how you were raised, your heritage, especially for folks who might not be familiar with your memoir, that can help us get to know Brittany the person and what you bring to the work.
Yeah, I am a Black daughter of the rural South through and through. I am born and raised Texan from East Texas, very small country town. The town that I grew up in my early years is actually named after my mom's family. It's called Fulbright, with about 150 people. And then I grew up mostly in Bogota, Texas, which is in East Texas, with about 1,200 people, couple stoplights. I am definitely a product of that environment, and it's an upbringing that I wouldn't trade for the world.
Isn't there something with Bogota, the pronunciation? This is a Southern thing.
It's spelled like Bogota, like
Okay.
Colombia,
Yeah.
but it is solely pronounced Bogota.
This is such a phenomenon. My husband was raised in the South, and he'll tell me certain, like the pronunciations of certain things, and I'm like, you just straight up made like a different word. Like, you can't tell the South what to do.
We did not pronounce it the way it's spelled at all.
I love it. That's real. That's real dialect. So Brittany, what did you want to be when you were a child? Did you have, of course, now you're an accomplished attorney, an advocate, but what did you have a sense of what your calling was when you were young?
I always wanted to be a lawyer, as cliche as it may sound. I wanted to be like Claire Huxtable on The Cosby Show.
Hmm.
Only thing is there are not many lawyers at all in rural East Texas, and there certainly weren't any lawyers who look like me. And as I got older, for some reason, that dream of becoming a lawyer, it started to feel like it was out of my reach, like out of my league.
Mm.
And I ended up going to school and becoming an accountant. But the dream of becoming a lawyer, like Claire Huxtable in the flesh, was always there.
That's beautiful. It was in you. Look at that. I love when it's like a seed is planted. Like you don't mess with that. Well, we're here talking about burnout, and I mean, you've done so much. I think the kind of like news headline statistic that sticks with me is that you and a partner litigated the freedom of, was it 19 people, 17 people in 90
17.
days?
Hmm.
Like just thinking of the enormity of that task. I don't even have to know your whole story to know that like there's a burnout risk there. But I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about what your day-to-day work was like before you experienced burnout. What were you doing for the space for social impact? And then especially what was it demanding of you, not just logistically, but mentally and emotionally, socially, that kind of drove you to an experience with burnout?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Before my major burnout, I was deep in the trenches of advocating for clients who were serving life sentences under draconian federal drug laws. And I think it's important to put into context that the federal system does not have parole. So my clients are serving life without parole sentences. They are literally set to die in prison for these drug offenses. And so my work, it just involved intensive legal research, um, getting to know my clients as people, and there's this public advocacy element to shift the narrative around mass incarceration. And so mentally, it demanded just relentless focus and persistence against the system that is built and thrives around human suffering, and so physically it meant long hours, sleepless nights. I work in the federal system, as we talked about, which means my cases are all across the country. So it was a lot of travel. And emotionally, Kat, it was a roller coaster when I think back on it, because you're working so hard to pick locks, the human cages, and with someone's life on the line, literally someone's
Mm,
life on the
mm.
line. And so it was a roller coaster. It was celebrating, hard won victories, and then at the same time enduring the devastation of setbacks, and so the stakes were truly life and death, and that weight is just indescribable.
And wasn't there a time when you were still fully doing another job as you were trying to help folks just pro bono, so without charging them? Can you describe a little bit about what that time in your career was like as well?
Yes, yes. I started my career as a corporate lawyer and working on mergers and acquisitions by day, literally closing billion-dollar deals and the 10, 12-hour days that come with that. And then at night, I would work pro bono on cases like those of Sharonda Jones. Sharonda was serving a life sentence for her first ever conviction for a federal drug offense, and just working to secure clemency for her during the President Obama's administration. And that was something that was a lot. It was a lot when I think about it. It was something I was very passionate about. So I went through it because I just couldn't see myself in a position with the legal skills to help someone like Sharonda and not.
Mm-hmm.
And so I say often, I fought for Sharonda's life as if it were my own, because it was.
Absolutely. I think there's something as well when when you have the awareness, the hypervigilance that you are a target as well. You are a
Yeah,
target of a harmful system, then it's not an exaggeration and it's not, rhetoric to say you're fighting for something as if it's your own life, because you really don't know what's
right.
coming for your family. I want to share. So I've made it, you guys, I've made it through multiple episodes of this podcast without being like, Webster's dictionary defines, like, and being like a true nerd and embarrassing. But I do want to share descriptions of what burnout actually is, because I think at least some of them bear challenging. So I look first to the World Health Organization, how they describe burnout. So they describe it as a workplace phenomenon and a syndrome conceptualized as resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. It is characterized by these three dimensions: feelings of energy depletion or exhaustion, increased mental distance from one's job, or feelings of negativism or cynicism related to one's job, and reduced professional efficacy. So I appreciate what they're trying to do. I appreciate that they are trying to make a catch all, how can you tell someone is burned out kind of description. But when I read that, I don't hear stories like yours at all. I
Mm-mm.
don't hear anybody who has a job that they are fortunate enough to be like super invested in. I just don't hear it at all. I first of all, the kind of whistle of like it has not been successfully managed, that always makes me a little defensive, because it's like, by who? Like if you work in social impact, the problems are not manageable. They are entrenched, generations old. You know what I mean? It's not a matter of it. It's rarely, in my observation and experience, a matter of an individual just simply not knowing how to manage their stress. I mean, hearing your story about literally doing M&As, such intense work, and then on
Yeah.
the side trying to save people's lives, that is not, to me, a management problem.
Right.
That's an individual bearing the weight of failing systems. I also think, of course, energy depletion and exhaustion, uh, you know, I- that has a role in things. But I also, what I'm hearing from you is that your purpose and probably your adrenaline were keeping you going. And I think of my own experiences with burnout, it was more of a sensation of like, holding back a door that wants to burst, and not leaning into the exhaustion. Um, and then increase mental distance from one's job. I just don't know that social impact professionals can afford that. I certainly
Yeah.
don't hear in your testimony that you were checked out. So I'm just curious, like how you would contrast what burnout in your work actually looked and felt like when you even recognized that you were burnt out, in contrast to that kind of more stoic description by the WHO.
Yeah, I think the realization for me came, Kat, just when my body and mind simply could not keep up with my willpower anymore. Like I remember just sitting at my desk one evening, just feeling like I was on the verge of tears without any specific reason, or
Mm-hmm.
just how heavy my fingers would feel just to type one sentence in emotion, or mornings where my body just physically could not get out of bed, and it wasn't really an exhaustion that I think I felt at the time. It was just this profound sense of emptiness and emotional depletion. Like I will say that I felt more disconnected from myself than the work, and it would come where we were get a victory, a client on average, our clients have served over 20 years on average, and so someone would get free and it was just like, okay, on to the next one. Instead of just realizing that we have literally helped save someone's life, and understanding that what that means for this person and for society and their families, and what that means for me to have a hand in that, and that was really a time where I just kind of felt like I was floating above myself, like watching myself go through the motions. And that's when I realized, that something is off.
Mm-hmm. I have heard that before from other social impact pros that like it doesn't feel like there is a moment, I mean, let alone to rest for oneself, to rest to celebrate. Because it's like the problems are so, they just don't stop. And if you're an empathetic person, you're thinking about each individual, you know. So I really hear that. So what did you do what was the moment like that you finally said, I can't? Because I know people in our space don't like to say I can't. We don't like to let people down, you know.
Yeah, I think during this period, I just leaned heavily on mentors and friends who had walked similar paths. A dear friend of mine, my co-counsel during the 90 Days of Freedom campaign, my angel Cody, we were kind of experiencing some of the same things and unvoiced in a way that when we realized our experiences were similar and we could speak to each other about it, we helped each other through it. So like her insight was just invaluable. And other mentors and just understanding that stepping back was not a failure, but a necessity.
Mm,
I also during this time sought the support of a healer just to reconnect with my inner self, and so relied a lot on meditation, and coming back home to myself to create that space for reflection, and to feel within my body again, to embody all the things that I wanted. And that is so important.
absolutely. We recently had a conversation in this series about spirituality being kind of under discussed across social impact, both as a way to connect people to values, but also to connect them to themselves. So I appreciate you bringing that in. Did you consider leaving your work ever when you were burnt out?
Oh yes, absolutely. I think in the depths of burnout, I question if I could even continue this work at all. The thought of stepping away from social impact to protect my mental, my emotional health crossed my mind more than once. But however, taking a break and rediscovering why I started in the first place has helped renew my commitment, and also understanding and giving myself permission to evolve in the work. Like I had to make a very hard decision that I am not taking any more cases personally. Myself, I've trained over 150 lawyers to help carry on the work, carry forward the work. I have helped to free over 65 men and women who were serving life without parole
Oh my
in
God.
federal prison for drug offenses. And I learned to be very proud of that work. I learned that, as my dad said to me, as I was feeling very guilty about not wanting to personally take cases anymore, my dad said, Brittany, if you don't get another person out of prison, you have done enough. And really giving myself permission to leave that guilt behind. And so while I will forever be committed to freedom, I am excited that I'm giving myself permission to show up in different ways for the cause.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's so beautiful that you've passed on your knowledge to other folks who can go and exponentiate the impact, because
Yeah.
sometimes I get that too, where I'll feel like stuck. Like if it's not me, like what am I doing? But the
Yeah.
idea of like impact through others and scaled impact through others, that excites me, and feels more supportive to you.
Yeah, it does. And it's like what I've learned in my own healing journey is a lot of that, if not me, who is just a trauma response
Oh,
from something that we need to heal within ourselves and understanding this whole I just fed myself this misguided belief of martyrdom, of self-sacrifice
mm,
for the greater good, and I don't believe in that form of self-sacrifice anymore. We have to be whole. We have to be whole.
it feels like a good time I feel like the culture and the discourse is talking about that more, and particularly in conversations led by Black women activists, advocates, social impact professionals. I read WHO's take on what burnout is, but I want to read a different take. And then I also actually want to invite another voice into the space. You guys know I love doing that. Just like, surprise, there's another person. But I love a good old round table. But let me find this other description. So there was a piece published in Refinery 29 in 2022, by a woman of color, professional advocate. It's called How I'm Saving Myself from Burnout While Fighting for Change. And she similarly took issue with the definition of burnout that is presented and characterized to the world. So she writes, Google burnout and you will see the National Health Service in the UK where she lives, reductively lumping it with stress as something manageable and situational. Rather, it's the self-combusting exhaustion that arises when someone cares so much about a cause within a system that doesn't seem to care back. And that description, when I read that, that sounded a lot more like what it's felt to me. My story with like capital B burnout, though I've certainly experienced exhaustion several times throughout my professional life, was in the fall of 2020. I was working at an organization that offered consultancy and campaigning and creative content, about social change. And we had been for the preceding few years on what you would call like a quote racial equity journey, trying to make, to equip the team holistically, regardless of personal identity, to be more sensitive and more responsive to moments of racial injustice. So when everything happened in the summer of 2020, George Floyd killed, I believe, in May, and then all of the demonstrations against, police brutality, that really tense cultural moment, it felt ridiculous to not say anything or to not offer anything to the space, to the movement work that was going on that many people were doing for free, not as part of their professional path. And so there was this question about like, well, what could we offer? And this organization did a lot of narrative change work. I was involved in a lot of that kind of, storytelling and messaging work. So I said, well, why don't we offer some free narrative change workshops, to anybody who's working on racial justice, hoping especially to connect with practitioners of color and just offer our knowledge and insight to the space so that they can go forth and do what they know how to do. And so we did that. And immediately afterwards, I just was like, similar to you, Brittany, I had been going on adrenaline and on a sense of purpose and on a sense that it had to be me. And within an organization, there can be an especially intense feeling of that because you're looking around, you're like, oh, no other Black woman? Okay. Well, I guess, I guess it is largely led by me. And I ended up taking off several weeks from work on a mental health leave, which was significant for a few reasons. One, I as much as I like to think of myself as like, I do what I want, whatever, like I am not impervious to the cultural norming around, hustle, 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 like wear it as a badge of honor if you can get a bunch of stuff done and carry it as a failure if you need to stop and rest. And so it felt uncomfortable to even say that I was taking a rest for mental health. It felt like I believed in its purpose, but saying it out loud to others, it still kind of felt like I had to justify, And I also felt that there was a stigma around the phrase mental health because that was like the keyword that I needed to get the time to get people to understand I'm not just asking for a few days off. This is a significant rest, but it also makes it the most vulnerable. So now here we go. It is on record with whoever, insurance, the company, whatever. It is now part of my story that I needed a mental health break, like how could I need that, And so I don't know. I learned a lot about what I thought and felt and was affected by culturally in that moment. But the core feeling that drove me to say, even with those scary, intimidating, uncomfortable things, I'm going to advocate for the rest that I need was like this writer, Evie Muir, forgive me if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly, speaks to a self-combusting exhaustion, something that's not manageable and that's not situational. That's bigger than you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we are actually joined by another professional change maker, who has experienced burnout, and another Black woman. So do with that what you will, but please help me welcome to the space Gabrielle Wyatt. Gabrielle is the founder and CEO. Can I call you Gabby?
Sure.
I find myself saying Gabby, but then being like, oh, we have company. Let me say Gabrielle. Gabrielle is the founder and CEO of the Highland Project, which is a coalition effort amongst Black women leaders. And they innovate solutions or support each other through solutions they're already innovating to create multi-generational wealth for Black communities and to just avail themselves of support in that effort. And I think I am not a fellow, but I think with a strong flavor of just being there for one another, just witnessing each other, the work that they're doing and appreciating its significance and the weight of it. Before creating and running the Highland Project, Gabby had an illustrious career in education. So she was the chief strategy officer at Civic Builders, which is a nonprofit that supports the creation of public charter schools. And she also held leadership roles in public education in New Jersey, New York, and Maryland. Gabby, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. I'm Brittany. It's great to see you.
You too.
So same thing. I gave the people just a little flyover of professional Gabby. Is there anything about Gabby more holistically that you'd like to share with us today?
Gabby holistically is entering on a balmy October day. And that's not normal for anyone listening because I'm based in New York City. But I come by way of Baltimore. I come from an incredible lineage of public school educators and public servants. My parents met teaching back home. My sisters are phenomenal teachers. And I knew I had a responsibility to uphold our lineage. And I grew up with make-believe school. That was my favorite thing to do after school and on the weekend was ask for chalkboards and an overhead projector that I'm still waiting on. so that I could refine the Wyatt lineage craft of teaching stuffed animals. So.
I love that. Listen, the overhead projector, that was high tech. That was an investment.
High tech. And I did not receive it. So what I did was I held a flashlight next to a transparency sheet against my wall. And I asked my bears and dolls to read.
Look at that. Committed to the future. Oh, thank you, Gabby. So you always knew you wanted to be a teacher, or you felt called to be a teacher?
I felt called certainly to be in education. Unlike my sisters, did not choose a traditional path in education. I think I watched them step into what I believe is truly a vocational calling. It's not a job. It's a calling. It is a caregiving function. It is a dream keeping role. As I watched them step into those roles, I think I had that, like, I didn't have the language at the time, but that moment of asking myself, how can I be part of this ecosystem? And I went to magnet school about an hour away from our home to access better school options, to be in a space that really would actualize my brilliance as a biracial Black girl. And so I went to school to study acting. And probably around my sophomore year, I began to really reckon with where I was zoned to go to school, which was where my father was teaching. And I was pissed. I was pissed because I felt like I got this golden ticket that I didn't feel I needed. I felt that I would have been okay wherever I went to school. That was just like this sort of just like fire that I had. I was like, I would have figured it out. My parents would have figured it out. And how do more kids get this opportunity? And I had an educator, like I feel like many of us do, who said, I want to help actualize this fire in your belly. And it was Miss Casaurus. And she said, like, why don't you run for school board? And there's not even SGA really at our school. We were really just like the hippie art school. And I say that lovingly to hippies. But long story short, I decided to run for school board at 17. I earned a seat with voting rights. And I didn't look back at the time. Over time, I was given the lesson by the superintendent that he truly believed in co-powering with voices that were underinvested in, my own. And I begin to shift my understanding that I too was underinvested in and would have been underinvested in if I went to my zone school.
Got it.
And I didn't, again, have the language, but I learned I love structural change. I love sitting at tables focused on moving power dynamics, resource flows, and policies to actually center our brilliance.
Mm-hmm. Very powerful. And I love the contrast of your story from Brittany's as well, just in the professional sense, from law and education. I think now, so I grew up probably like all of us, I like born in the 80s, and like in the 90s, I feel like every like dig joke was like a lawyer joke. like you're like evil, you're greedy, you're dishonest, you're this and that. And like now, I think there's more of a holistic discourse, probably because now there's social media, there's more different kinds of stories being told about the plurality of lawyers who are there because they want to advocate for what's right. And I think that opens the door to talk more about your lived professional experience, including with burnout. And then similarly, Gabby, with the pandemic just shining a light that you couldn't look away from the role of educators, and particularly their constant threat of burnout or just working through burnout, So I appreciate that we get to talk about this one at all, because the new chapter that we're in awareness, but especially together. So Gabby, I actually don't know. I heard from a mutual friend that some of your professional inspiration today is informed by experiences that you had with burnout, but I actually don't know your story. So I'm wondering if you can share with us like what your work was like, what it was demanding of you, and then what led you, like what pushed you to the edge.
Yeah. I've been thinking, obviously, and talking to you both today about burnout in my life a lot. And I appreciate the second definition that you read, because it actually was, I feel like, a rub for me as I was preparing for this discussion of I believe we as Black humans carry generational exhaustion
Mm.
and we carry generational possibility and legacy. And so I name that because as I look back and try to excavate, where were the moments of hopelessness? Where were the moments of lack of creativity? Where were the moments of lack of belonging? Of lack of seeing a legacy, of lack of seeing possibility? I actually see them pop up more often than when I find myself speaking with Highland leaders and talking about what I thought at the time was like the capital B burnout. And so I name that because I think it's incredibly important to bring in our identities and our lineage to this conversation. Because when I really think about burnout, and if I'm honest with myself, I first experienced it not when I was in Newark, New Jersey a few years ago, but it actually was when I was in grad school at Harvard Kennedy School. And for me, it was the moment I had worked to earn and fought a place for. And when I entered, was 1 in 5 Black students out of 200 at the premier school, right, for training public servants.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't realize how much I already was exhausted entering to fight and earn that seat. But then to be in a sphere that didn't see me, and I didn't see myself in case studies, I didn't see myself in faculty, I didn't see myself in the student body, and yet I was being asked to imagine new worlds, right? And not flunk out, keep myself, all of those things. I remember so many moments of, to Brittany's point of like, do I want to go to class today? Can I get out of bed today? And so I think when you talk about burnout with social justice entrepreneurs, what comes to me is like, when are those moments when you couldn't see new worlds? When you couldn't imagine new worlds from a place of possibility? And so that came up for me. You know what? I think my most well-known story of burnout was in Newark, New Jersey. I was chief strategy officer, leading large-scale school reform against the backdrop of a incredibly controversial mayoral race and school administration. It was against the backdrop of a major billionaire gift drop, the Zuckerberg $100 million gift drop in Newark. And I found myself leading large-scale reduction in the public school district's footprint, not just from a school facility, but also a human perspective. We had inherited decades of financial mismanagement and, frankly, adults behaving badly and not in pursuit of actualizing the brilliance of kids. That's a fancy way of saying I was closing schools and part of discussions around reduction in forces that impacted the lowest wage workers, which happened to be the same workers failed by the same school system I was seeking to reform. And burnout for me manifested as, I think a real crisis in hope and understanding, because I felt like I was fighting in a system that looked like me to disrupt the status quo. And I think to stand in school board meetings trying to reckon with the future of students with someone who looks like you, and you're trying to articulate how systematically they were failed by administrations before them, it was a real burden. And it was a burden as a young person. I was less than 30 years old in that role. It manifested as sitting one night for our superintendent for a school board meeting, having security taking me off of the school board podium because crowd rhetoric and movements towards me became so dangerous.
Wow.
And it resulted the next day in me, I had the language for it at the time, having a panic attack as I shared what happened that night with my boss. And, leading up to that moment, I had questions about how much longer I could stick it out in that role. And that moment put into headlights for me that if I didn't care about my own humanity in this, I had there was no other future that would unravel itself for me because I wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
My body was showing examples of taking me out because I didn't have the courage to name for myself that I was moving no longer in alignment with what I believed could be possible for the future.
Mm. Well, so I'm sorry to hear that. And what I appreciate about your story is that you're speaking to the intangible exhausting factors, which I named a few at the beginning, but just layering on the experience, the lived experience of marginalization, not the concept,
That's right.
but, really, really being the only one, which is also an experience that I have had, is a stressor. It is like a leak in a tire, just draining your energy, draining it silently, subtly, but weakening you. So I appreciate you bringing that into the conversation and particularly pointing out the nuance and the reality that it can go both ways.
Mm-hmm.
It can be in the moments when you're the only one, but it can also be in the moments when you are trying to work with and on behalf of people who are within your community and feeling the disconnect. There's an additional social rejection, I believe, that gets triggered, and a deep pain and a deep loneliness that gets triggered when you feel like your own don't even see you. I've had that experience as well as someone who my whole life, and I'll just leave it at this, you'll know what it means, but the headline being, you talk white, say no more. The rejection is so painful. And that's another leak in your joy, leak in your capacity for creativity, leak in your wellness. So I appreciate that. And I also appreciate you talking about the very literal bodily threats that exist in our work, which I think the fact that this hasn't come up before now in these conversations is testament to the compartmentalization that we do so that we're not too afraid to do our jobs. But, standing in front of a room full of people more powerful and older and more arguably, with more resources than you have, and disagreeing with them and feeling energetically what it feels like to be turned on, putting your face on the internet and talking about unpopular opinions and holding people way more powerful than you to account, whether it's you as the creator or you kind of with an organization, it's vulnerability. It is a unique vulnerability. And that is also stress. Even if nobody ever touches you, the awareness of that on some level, again, that hypervigilance, that feeling of exposure and threat, it's no wonder that burnout is lurking around every corner in this work. It's crazy. Oh my goodness. Well, I appreciate you sharing your story. I'm curious, same questions as with Brittany. I'm very curious who, I know you the next day when you had your panic attack, it sounded like you had a safe person that you could share with, but how did you sustain yourself more broadly? Like, who did you turn to? What were the resources? Were there any resources? And then, or you answered this already, actually, like if you had considered leaving the work, it sounds like the answer to that one was yes.
Yeah, it was a unique time. It was a time where a lot was shifting in local education politics, but also statewide politics. It was the time of Bridgegate. It was the time of Christie questioning running for president. We were a state-run school district. And we were, the all of these were pointing to our administration was ending soon. And so I share that for context because I don't know the counterfactual to what would have happened. I was keeping an eye on this notion that our administration likely was going to end soon. And so there was a natural planning for what would be next that was bubbling up in my life.
I see.
What I think really came to a head was my internalization of that moment of, frankly, actually not turning to someone to say, I'm experiencing now a physical health response to this. But knowing that meant as I looked for my next role, I named I actually couldn't go back into New York City Department of Education. And that was, I think, a big thing for me. Because what I noticed was when I started to look at those roles, my shoulders were going up, right? My heart rate was going up. My lack of ability to see possibility was increasing. And that was an important intervention, right? Because I at least removed myself 1 degree from a culture of investment in young talent and specifically Black and Brown talent for short-term wins
I see.
over long-term sustainability of structural change. And so I think I could have chosen to go into another similar role in a local school district. And I'm not sure what Gabby you would be talking to today. And instead I chose, I'm going to go like a degree separate. I'm going to go into national education philanthropy. That helped to stabilize my physical health. You know, I focused on getting better nutrition, getting outdoors, walking, eventually running again, like those pieces. But I had pattern recognition again at the end of 2019. I wasn't seeing hope. I was spinning on being like obsessed with success over mastery of a vision. I was noticing my relationships were strained again. To use Brittany's language, that I was disconnected again from myself, that my voice was no longer the loudest in my head. And that's when I said, actually, girl, you're still burnt out. Like you might have like you're still actually like you might have told yourself for the last 4 years you weren't operating from a place of burnout.
Right.
But you actually haven't healed. And it's not just that you haven't healed, discovering what you really think is true human Black woman potential that can be sustained for the long term.
Oh, the body does not lie. And I just want to give the grace of, I'm hearing that you didn't immediately recognize that you were still burnt out, but you were getting there.
That's
you
right.
were honing your self-awareness, you know, and you were listening to the physical cues and you were taking interventions, the walking, the running, the therapy, you know, like the caretaking of you somehow you were making time and head and heart space for that. So I want to affirm the effort, not just for your benefit, but for anybody who might be listening. Like the little things do matter. Putting in a block for one of the simplest things that my partner and I did when I was co-leading an office at my last organization was, you know, you can't make grown people do what they don't want to do, but putting in a lunch block. And it's so simple, but it was like, I don't want it to be on my watch that people feel like they can't go outside or eat. Like the small steps do lay the groundwork for like better habits and eventually a better balance. So I commend you for getting there. You out there, you figured it out. You saw it for what it was. Well, I'm curious from each of you. I just know, I'm even just thinking personally about people that I know and work with who are going to hear some aspect of their experience in both of your stories. And I know it is, you know, the interventions necessarily have to be personal. Nobody's going to advocate for you like you, but there is some systemic responsibility if we as a sector are serious about what we say we're doing, which is bringing people in, bringing in great talent, open, creative minds, passionate hearts to build a better future. We have to make that sustainable. It has to feel possible. It has to feel survivable, you know? And I'm just curious, have you seen any meaningful efforts of any scale in your work, in your communities, to try to make work life more sustainable for people working in impact, to try to stave off burnout? Have you seen any conversations? Have you seen any interventions? Or is the next thing we need to talk about that you haven't?
Yeah, I think there have been steps in the right direction, you know, like discussions around sustainable work practices and just healing justice initiatives that I call. I think love what Gabby's doing at the Highland Project and just building a collective of Black women, because I think that together, that community is what we are so desperately lacking. And it's so needed to avoid this culture of wounded warriors trying to do good in the world, you know? And so definitely initiatives like that are just so powerful, you know, but I do think that we're still catching up in terms of normalizing rest and creating environments where people don't feel guilty for stepping back. It we operate in this space where there's like this intricate dance between despair and hope every day.
Mm, that's right.
And so I think we have to really move beyond just a wellness workshop, and truly move to create systems that embed self-care just into the culture of our organization.
Mm-hmm.
And I would push to say, and our communities. I think that we're in a moment right now that feels prolonged, in my opinion, of wellness and rest trending, of it being co-opted, of it being scratched the surface, of it not centering just our ancestral lineage of rest. I think to the Black Panthers, right, who taught meditation classes alongside organizing classes. And so this notion that this is foreign to us as Black humans and bodies is false. I think to the American Maroons, who literally used rest and play to create their own communities because they actually did not believe they were enslaved.
Mm.
And so I think that there, for me, if you had asked me this question, Kat, 4 years ago, I would have gone through, here's some things that work-life culture, work can do on this. Here's examples that I've seen, but I'm entering this discussion now a little over 4 years into Highland in a completely different place in my own sustainability journey. And it's not to sound preachy, but it's to say, I deeply believe that if we as individuals cannot develop abundance within ourselves, cultivate abundance within ourselves, we're just pushing an uphill rock. And to that, what I really specifically mean is Octavia Rahim, my coach and our chief daydreaming officer at Highland, she wrote this book in 2020, Gather. And it was an anchor text for me in discovering my legacy, but also discovering Highland. And she wrote that abundance is the capacity and space to fully thrive. And my relationship with that sentence, at first I thought about, okay, how do I create the next workplace where I can fully thrive? And I realized I had to create this vessel of mine, meaning my body, to be a place where I can fully thrive. This is something of embodiment, of embodiment in honoring who we are, regardless if we're talking in a work context, in a caregiving context, as a volunteer, as a dog mommy, right? It does to me, I'm putting all of those roles and titles aside. What are our practices to honor that we deserve to thrive too? And that's not to say there's no responsibility of the system, but there's so much unconditioning and then honoring of ourselves that I think I've had the privilege of watching so many of our leaders recognize and center. And I think that is the way that they are rediscovering hope, that they're rediscovering visions that are going to exist beyond them.
Beautiful. That really resonates. It's an intriguing time to have a job, to be working, because you are seeing, after the kind of great reshuffling, or I don't know if we're still in it, but just sort of all of the layoffs and the shakeups and the restructuring and what have you, I'm seeing more and more people, including in our sector or interconnected sectors that make up social change work, go independent. And it's a grind. It is a grind, but also there is room for more flexibility and more tailoring of that grind to oneself. And so I wonder if this is a meta opportunity of this moment, that you're not just changing how you think about work in terms of, am I full-time or independent contractor? Am I doing the work, or am I, coaching others and consulting others on doing the work? But also, am I now building a version of my work life that takes my humanity more into account, so that I can show up for other human beings? That would feel really exciting to me. I want to be having a conversation in 5 to 10 years about how our generation of professional change makers was the push that progressive initiatives needed for their next set of wins. I don't want to be having a conversation about how we were so close to all of these changes, but just, between like the political pressure and all of the like internalized like exhaustion and stuff, things just kind of petered out. That is my real, it might be an irrational, like a dramatic version of the fear, but that is my fear. I just had a baby. I need the world to work out. I have aging parents like everybody else. I need the world to be okay. I'm tired. I'm a millennial. I'm like, it's been one catastrophe over after another. I need everything to work out. So I'm like very invested in like, how do we set up people to thrive using your language, Gabby, so that they can help build a better future. This has been an amazing discussion. I want to begin to wind us down. I am curious how you approach your careers now in contrast to how you approached them before you had the firsthand experience of flaming out. What do you do differently? What do you see differently? How do you move differently?
Yeah, I definitely learned to set boundaries that honored both my commitment to the cause and my own personal well-being. And so with those boundaries, I began to say no more often and prioritize my energy. People would come to me, speaking of what Gabby was talking about, just the physical threat. Like if I was speaking somewhere, one day I left and there was a woman who had been waiting for me. She saw on social media I was speaking at a place. She was waiting for me and literally begging me to represent her loved one. And I think that what gets lost oftentimes in the work that I do and the campaign my co-counsel and I did, we don't charge clients. We're still working pro bono in a sense, or self-funding our work or getting donations here and there. So we work and we're exacting from ourselves in this physical sense. And then to be met with a woman who I don't blame, she was taking her shot, to help her loved one, but I was caught off guard. I had to say no, but in other times I would have felt guilty for saying no, or people will say, Brittany, the people need you. And I had to learn that I need me too, and so prioritizing my energy, and just continuing to focus on the work that deeply aligned with my purpose, it just helped me become more intentional about taking breaks, and treating them not as luxuries, but as essential, to be able to do this work effectively.
How about yourself, Gabby?
I double tap that. And I think that with the boundaries, it's also finding the people who will hold those with you as well. And so I think, I would not be where I am on my journey right now in clarity on what I need to be me, regardless as Gabby, a founder, wife, auntie, if it weren't for folks like Rita on my team who like holds it through when I say, I can't meet with you until 3 months from now. That she's the one who reinforces that. She could certainly probably find time on my calendar in a walking block, in a lunch break block, right? But we have a mutual agreement, right? That taking that time is to use your deeply profound 4-letter word language, Kat, a leak, right? It's a leak in the system. I think I approach it from not taking lightly the opportunity in launching an organization that I had to deeply make sure we were walking the talk as well, that we embedded our rest breaks, that we embedded elasticity to consider when people might need 3 months off because holding space too is a burden, right? Against the backdrop of being Black women walking in this world. It, I think, has been patience that I've had of like, what's the one, Octavia always says to our team, what's the 1% that you can take off today to get more comfortable? And can you commit to doing that for 30 days? Well, then in that whole course of that month, you got 30% more comfortable. Let's celebrate that.
Look at that.
Right? And so now can you add 2% as this next month comes? And so I think it's a deep belief in what Adrienne Marie Brown says, right? Like what we pay attention to grows, and small scale change is actually what matters, I think, in stepping into really an ownership that we can live our lives differently, that we don't have to accept grind culture. And we actually don't have to actively resist against it. We can actually, like the Maroons, create a different reality. for ourselves.
That's so powerful too, thinking of you as a businesswoman, seeing that as part of your success strategy, seeing that as a business intervention as well. It's of course a human first intervention because I know you, but seeing it as not in conflict with what you're trying to do from a mission perspective, but essential to what you're trying to do. I feel like that the more people get that unlock, we're really going to be doing something, for ourselves and for each other.
I agree.
Okay, I have 3 closing prompts. You can answer all of them, some of them, one of them. Would love to know, I always like to know this, but especially in this conversation, what sustains you and what keeps you motivated in this work? What ultimately brings you back to the work, even though, as we know, the days can be hard? Another prompt is, if people take away just one thing from this conversation, what do you hope that it is? And the last is a plug opportunity. If there's anything you're working on that you want our community to know about and want to shout out.
What keeps me going is just this unwavering belief in the power of transformation. I think of my dad often, and I get chills hearing Gabby speak about the possibilities, and having the power to co-create these possibilities and reimaginings of freedom and justice. I left my corporate job in 2016 to devote myself, to transforming unjust systems. And I was in a space where I'm like, I wasn't sure if I should leave. I left a lot of money, a lot of upward trajectory. And I was going to my dad as I normally do. And he said, Brittany, don't worry about the challenges. Imagine the possibilities instead. And so what keeps me sustained and motivated is imagining the possibilities, and understanding what I've been very privileged to be a part of and witness. And that is people who are finding freedom, not just physically from these life sentences, but witnessing them with this freedom mentally and spiritually after facing unimaginable adversity, and knowing that my work can be a catalyst for justice as I see it, that is really what keeps me going. And I would love for listeners to take forward from this conversation and understand that burnout is not a personal failure. It is just it's our bodies working. It's a signal that we need to reassess how we are approaching the work in our lives, and that taking care of ourselves is not selfish. It is essential, and understanding that rest and boundaries and community support are part of that equation. One of Audre Lorde, who I adore, one of her quotes about self-care that I like to quote in my book is, caring for myself is not self-indulgence. It is self-preservation. And that is an act of political warfare. And so really just emphasizing that, especially for people who are engaged in the fight for justice and social change. And so just excitedly, I'm just at an inflection point, in my own career, working to build manifest freedom and economic freedom for people impacted by the criminal legal system. And really, as you were saying, Pat, in your work, using storytelling and narrative change to help push against that. And so we're working and planning an art exhibition that I'm looking forward to launching at the end of 25 at the intersection of art and justice. And really,
oh, yes.
Just looking to art. I've become very disillusioned about the work, if I'm very honest, and just been looking to artists and art for the light. And so I'm excited to bring that forth to help us reimagine freedom.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. I'm going to bug you to go.
Yeah, so we're looking to go to three different locations. Ideally, my vision is to end in Chicago in 26, coinciding with the President Obama's library. And yeah, that's me imagining the possibilities. So
let's speak it. I don't see why not.
Yes, I don't
Let's
either.
claim it today. Oh, thank you so much, Brittany. Thank you for sharing that.
What keeps me sustained and motivated, without a doubt, is generational lineage. My grandmother back home in Baltimore, she's 102, and grew up in Weldon, North Carolina, owned her home, sold her home, has great grandbabies that she plays with to this day. And it sparks in me just this deep curiosity and admiration how in the hell is a Black woman born in Weldon, North Carolina, alive and thriving well? And what can I learn and what can I study? Because not just for me, but for the nation writ large, this nation was built on the backs of Black women. And yet too many of us haven't been able to live to my grandmother's age in a thriving way.
Right.
And I wish for all of us that we can actually be the next Ruth Eva Wyatts, right? That we can be thriving and observe the fruits of our labor. Nature keeps me motivated. I am an amateur bird watcher. And I also just deeply believe in studying the thing that has been around longer than my grandmother, which is Mother Earth, right? And like, if we know the only constant is change and Mother Earth is still here, what can we learn as we seed new worlds, but also navigate the real realities of the now? I hope that listeners take away this notion of the 1% and this question and charge, like, what's the 1% that you can do today? And I think if Octavia were here, I know she would say, like, please let that 1% be hydrating yourself. Like, let's not forget the basics,
physical body,
right? Exactly, the physical body. And so perhaps my charge to folks is let that 1% be to have a lot of water today and do that every single day for the next couple of days. Our generation is deeply underhydrated. And then my plug, we are living in rapidly shifting times. And yet what I know to be true is that we as Black women are going to continue to do the work. And so I invite you to invest in what is the possibility ahead. Invest in Highland Project. You can follow us online at Lead Highland and at thehighlandproject.org.
Beautiful. Oh, Brittany and Gabby, I am so grateful that you made time and just opened yourselves in vulnerability to share your experience with our community. Your words are so valuable. Your work is deeply appreciated. I see you. I just love and appreciate you all. And to everybody listening, please, again, check out issuespacemedia.com, and we'll see you next time. Bye.